I've been kind of talking about the emergence of edtech for the last few years. Then, of course, you had the bigger issue of making sure that parents and students start to think about edtech offerings as mainstream offerings. I think that was the biggest question that everybody had, and well, will that happen? And we thought that eventually, at some point, once more acceptability happens, it will eventually happen. I think during COVID, that very quickly became the norm. And a lot of parents and students started to figure out that actually learning on online platforms can happen, and it is not just a supplemental medium, it can become the primary medium. And I do think that there is not going back from there. Of course, some of these things will correct when students go back to schools and may not have as much amount of time to spend online when learning or doing activities and so on. So there is some amount of correction may happen, but given that the market is huge, eventually that bump will be kind of soon forgotten. EdTech is there to stay. Now, as far as valuations are concerned, whether some companies are getting valued for future revenue, that's all fine, provided they can perform. And I do feel that eventually large platforms will emerge, whether it's the same company or a different company. I think execution will still need to happen. But in general, EdTech as a sector will become quite valuable, both in terms of generating revenues as well as having rich valuations eventually, as this becomes a mainstream sector within the education segment, if I were to say, for India as well as on a global level. We have two bets in the education space, both in the higher education space. For very simple reasons, we feel that, first of all, any innovation on the private side can happen only in unregulated sectors. If something is regulated, then in order to get licenses and work with the government to get things done can be fairly time consuming and hence less innovative. Which is why if you look at the education landscape, which has preschool, K-12 and higher education and continuing learning as four key pillars, and within that there is a regulated segment where colleges, schools, universities play, and then there's an unregulated segment where supplemental learning, where Baiju plays, and test prep where other people play, etc. Are open markets, or it's certification game where higher education players, certification players, because that's also unregulated. If I were to look at the entire unregulated spectrum, going from K-12 to higher education to continuing learning, we placed a bet in continuing learning in Eruditus, and then we played a bet in iNurture when it comes to quality of education in India, and hence a service provider model working with university to do the same task. We did not put a bet in K-12 because honestly, by the time we realized, some of the good companies, they had reached a certain valuation which went beyond our mandate to do so. But in general, I do feel that they are fairly good companies and we should have acted a little faster. But having said that, if there are three large unregulated segments, we at least have bets in two of them, and I'm quite happy about that. All the higher education courses tend to be a lot more global and interchangeable. However, a K-12 study, let's say how you teach maths in Marathi, would be very different from how mathematics to a certain extent is taught in Germany. There are cultural differences and so on, right? Hence, K-12 businesses tend to be assortment of local businesses on an international fashion, but higher education businesses tend to be a lot more global businesses where a Harvard degree can be appreciated in India and so on. Which is why, at least at Bertelsmann, we took a bet that, listen, we want to go after extremely large markets, and a global market has to be bigger than the national market. Absolutely. So 2-3 big things happen. Number one, because of COVID, the entire digitalization of companies came into the forefront. So if there was a offline company, selling offline, etc., everybody had to build online capabilities for all the working adults. That's one. And similarly, all those people working in a Nestle or a Coke or a Pepsi may want to become a lot more digital. So suddenly they thought that they wanted to acquire certain skill sets, hence certifications. Number two, they also realized that they don't need to now go and do physical classroom training for it. They can do it online. and emergence of Eruditus and Emeritus platforms, etc., and similar other platforms globally helped kind of bridge that gap. So we did see massive amount of demand coming into these segments also, which of course these are longer term programs, so it's not that overnight things kind of change. And again, these are fairly thought through kind of purchase decisions, so it takes time to kind of get it. But we are seeing significant tailwinds which will help companies like Eruditus increase their top line over the next 2 to 3 years, as they bring in not only a lot of this demand, but also a lot of supply comes in from universities who otherwise were which were otherwise very focused on building their own offline businesses. Suddenly, a lot of students from their offline businesses have also disappeared. And they also now need to launch a lot of online programs to make sure that their revenues gets stabilized. So we are seeing both tailwinds coming from the demand side as well as from the supply side, which is just amazing for companies in the edtech space as they build up. So I would actually make the differentiation between enable businesses and provider businesses. And provider businesses have a tougher time getting revenues, but their margins tend to be higher. So for example, if I have to sell a Harvard or a Wharton course, I have to give them a revenue share also because it's their course, right? Hence my margin would be lower, but then my marketing cost would be lower also because I don't have to sell Harvard or Wharton that much. Everybody knows what that is. And hence I would have immediate profitability and higher growth today. But if I have to build my own brand, let's call it Upgrad, which is trying to build its own brand, or Baiju that has to build its own brand, they have to be marketing significantly to the consumers to build their own brand. And hence they tend to be a lot more loss making in the beginning. But eventually when they become profitable, they don't have the element of this revenue share going to a university. So over time, they will become hopefully slightly better profitable if they've built their own brand and they don't have any partner cost. I like, of course, as an investor, I like the enablement model because it is a slightly less risky model where we are backing very top end brands which are very prevalent in the market and using their strength to build a good business. And that is a fairly linear. And if that what you meant was, does that mean that will be a lot more stable business? Yes, that will make sure that from day one it will be a lot more stable growth business versus a very high burn business in the beginning, then going into profitability eventually. And don't even know whether in a VC market a lot of them will end up becoming profitable or not, because not everybody are able to raise funding, especially when players like Baiju's etc. have emerged, which are extremely huge in terms of valuation. Not sure how many others will exist in the market. We are starting to kind of now go back to lending in a significant fashion. So yes, we did take a little bit of break in terms of lending, but that did not impact our book, given that some of the loans are of longer tenure and no need for us to worry about that. So both our profitability as well as our revenue, etc., were relatively intact in this period. Having said that, a lot of our companies in general, given that they are technology led and touchless, given that they're either e-commerce or they're logistics and so on, and fintech, they ended up to be net beneficiary of COVID. So from that perspective, we were quite lucky, I would say, outside of probably one or two companies which were strongly affected by COVID in a negative way. And over there also, thankfully, they had funding for two plus years. They have the ability to withstand this black swan event. Most of the companies ended up to be either neutral or positive side of COVID. So while we were cautious in the first 2-3 months, we then very quickly went back to doing business as normal. And in some cases, whether it's companies like Rupeek or Pepperfry, etc., we are now ramping up things because we feel that offline guys are at a significant disadvantage because it's a contact-based selling in shops versus remoteless or contactless selling happening online. What we ended up doing was all the companies which turned out to be COVID beneficiaries in a big way, and a lot of them are in my portfolio, we ended up backing their rounds as they were doing external fundings. And we continued to either remain equal to our stake or even ended up doing super pro rata in some of the companies so that we accelerate our stake in some of these companies as we think they can reach a much larger outcome than what we earlier had thought. I mean, a lot of people are talking about health tech as a sector that is kind of a must-have. I do hope that at some point we are able to kind of make a bet in that segment. As of now, I've not made it. Doesn't mean that I have a deal there. I've not. I honestly don't have a deal which I get excited about today. But at some point, would love to see some more health tech type of deals in my portfolio. I think education, we are fairly well covered. We may have missed the first wave of K-12 bets. At some point, we'll try to see if there are other bets that we can take in this sector. In general, I'm quite bullish on edtech in general as well. Health tech could be another one. I do feel that fintech and logistics continue to be two sectors that I continue to be excited about. I mean, I have some bets in these sectors, but two bets each. I want to go deeper in these segments. I do feel that they will be net beneficiary of COVID. I feel the next wave of companies is going to be more marketplace type of fintech companies where banks have woken up and they are saying, look, this digital revolution is real. I need to build deeper kind of penetration with this ecosystem, and I may need some fintech players like Rupeek to build a large gold loan business. I alone cannot do it. And those type of businesses are something that we like a lot. These are not very high risk businesses because risks are fundamentally being taken by the banks. I don't know. What I know is I don't as of now like the e-pharmacy space, but outside of that, everything is okay because I do feel that e-pharmacy is going to go down very similar to how horizontal e-commerce went. Today, I don't know whether Amazon will win, Jio will win, Walmart will win, or some of the new e-pharmacies guys will win. Who will buy who? I have no idea. So even if I like somebody, I can't take a bet because the players sitting at the back end, the big horizontal players, all will want to do this. And that just makes me nervous. Regulatory kind of clarity that's also needed. But I do feel that some of that will come because the government in general should be very pro e-pharmacy eventually, because provided they are following the right norms of distributing medicines with proper prescriptions, etc., which I do feel that they are doing a better job than the local chemist who may not even look at a prescription and just keep giving medicines away. But at the end of the day, the entire logistics sectors outside of e-commerce is still yet to be disrupted. Now, it could be the parcel business, it could be the office courier business, it could be large B2B overseas shipment business. There are so many parts of logistic chain. It could also be more warehousing, smart warehousing, automation, AI. There is so much amount of innovation that will come in logistics eventually that we continue to be excited about the sector and continue to look at great entrepreneurial teams who are building amazing businesses in this segment. As Bertelsmann, they've been, Bertelsmann as a group has been great partners to our local team in helping us build the right business. We are quite committed to that view. Also, Bertelsmann has given us extreme freedom to invest like any other third-party LP. So from that perspective, we don't have to worry about fundraising, etc. Yet at the same time, we get all the support of making some amazing investments as we have done. So I like that model. We'll continue till that point, till we feel that we need another strategic investor who can eventually add value. But till that time, I do feel that I think doing more in-house fundraising within Bertelsmann will remain the norm. And I do think that Bertelsmann has extremely deep pockets that they can continue to support the India business for a fairly long time.